Hey everyone, this is BlackHawkSC and welcome back to my channel. A topic that's been raging in the MWO community these days is LRMs, specifically the recent buffs they've got from the last several patches. To refresh everyone's memory, since April, PGI has increased their base velocity from 160 to 190, increased ammo count per ton, and decreased heat by 6 to 7%, while increasing spread for clan LRMs. Now, I can literally do an hour video on this subject, but in this video, I'm going to concentrate on 3 items. First, where LRMs stand right now, given the recent changes. Why they are more dangerous than they should be in the current state of MWO, and what you can do to defend yourself against LRMs if you're dying to them. MWO's implementation of LRMs have always been controversial. While on the surface they have features that no other weapons in the game has, like indirect fire, there are also several excellent counters to the weapon, such as using map features for cover, which takes advantage of the LRM's low velocity, ECM, and to a lesser extent AMS. LRMs also aren't capable of directing damage to specific components, making their damage inefficient. As such, they've gained the reputation of being a weapon system that players grew out of once they've gained more skill in the game. In other words, at least before, they were seen as a weapon that did well against new or lower skilled players and were far less effective against higher skilled players. So does this still apply after the recent changes to LRMs? I think it's best to look at it objectively. The velocity increase from 160 to 190 is a 19% increase to its base stats. Taking 5 velocity nodes increases its speed by another 15% to 218. But even then, LRMs are still the slowest projectile in the game today, with the exception of ATMs. Not only that, there's another delay before an LRM mech can lock on, which can be as long as 3 seconds if an enemy is under ECM. This has always been a drawback of LRMs, and the velocity increase helps LRM users, but it doesn't fundamentally eliminate the most effective LRM counter, which is good positioning. Second, the increased ammo per ton. This change by PGI is mostly related to the decision to force stock mech loadouts in the 2018 World Championships. As a result, nearly all non-energy weapon systems saw ammo count buff. Given that energy, especially clan energy, is already in a good state, I just don't see anything wrong with this move. A lot of DACA builds that were somewhat low on ammo count, like the UAC-10 WUAC-5 Black Widow, now has sufficient ammo to last through more games. There haven't been nearly as many complaints about them as there are about LRM ammo buffs, even when some of the DACA mechs are already quite good. Third is the heat buffs, which I think is the most significant change of the 3. A quad LRM 20 bow can chain fire nearly heat neutrally with enough heat gen and cool run nodes and 4 or 5 external DHS. For a mech that's out of position, this is quite dangerous, but the clan heat buffs also came with a 6% spread nerf, making clan LRM damage even less efficient than before. In my tests, an LRM 20 with Artemis averages a bit above 19 damage on a target the size of an Atlas, and about 15 to 16 damage on a Centurion. And in the real world, a lot of that damage will go to shield components on these mechs or miss completely, depending on if the target is moving. Overall, though, these are small changes to heat and spread, so it's really not a game changer. To put it into perspective, the amount of heat that is reduced by this change on a quad LRM-20 salvo, for example, is dissipated in under a second by the 10 engine DHSs. Putting all 3 changes into perspective, I think LRMs got better, no doubt, especially as a suppressive weapon. But as an actual weapon that kills mechs and helps you win games, the changes are not terribly impressive. Its performance is still very dependent on your team and the map that you get. On most maps, good players can still position well enough to mostly avoid LRM damage. The increased DPS does help LRM users get inflated match scores, which some players apparently obsess over since it's directly tied to a player's performance on some public leaderboards. While match score is better than most individual measures of how well a mech contributes to a game, LRMs is a case where I believe match score doesn't do as good of a job. First, since half of your match score comes from damage, you have to keep in mind that LRMs do lots of damage that doesn't ultimately contribute to the death of an enemy mech. LRM players are often the last to die, which means that they maximize their chances of doing high damage and hence get a high match score. Match score doesn't take into account that this damage maximizing LRM playstyle causes a player to rarely share armor, and that they kill enemies less quickly than direct fire weapons, given the player has good enough aim and knows where to shoot. In other words, LRMs often end up sacrificing their teams for high damage loss. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I hate LRMs. I think LRMs have a place in the game. Some players will rely on it, which I have no problems with, and it's a different playstyle that I occasionally enjoy myself. But to say that they're OP or too strong is just ignoring a lot of facts and exaggerating the effects of the recent buffs. So why is there so much LRM talk these days, even though the changes aren't that mind-blowing? My theory is that some players haven't played LRMs for a long time, and sometimes even years, and seeing these three changes, they've decided to see how LRMs have improved. Now, all of a sudden, they realize LRMs are stronger than they remember, but that's not really due to the LRM changes themselves, but rather the cumulative effects of other changes in the game that have occurred in the last several years. I'll talk more about that later. A second reason is that I feel some players are frustrated because other weapons needing buffs are not getting buffed, but LRMs are. People have called for SPLs to be turned back into high burst damage weapons for a while now, and that hasn't happened. And of course, the third reason is that LRMs can be pretty annoying to play against, as they always have been. They've always been reasonably effective as suppressive weapons, which stops you from doing what you want to do. And people just don't like that they're better at suppression than before. Going back to my first point, what are these changes that gradually cause LRMs to be stronger? Among the most important factors is Psr and overall matchmaking. Psr had an effect in the first couple of months, but it was obvious to everyone that it's simply an XP bar with no relation to actual skill. So 3 years later, even in the upper tiers, you'll be playing against players who haven't learned how to defend against LRMs, whether they are buffed or not. This problem is compounded by a falling player population, which I think is also at least partially influenced by PSR's poor design. The second factor is the skill tree. This by itself led to several problems. First, the overall agility of mechs were greatly decreased when the skill tree was introduced. Even with full mobility nodes, any mech bigger than a light, and especially the fatties that are the favorite targets of LRM boats, couldn't get the same agility as they had before. Players found it a lot harder to recover from a positioning mistake. Again though, this isn't an LRM specific problem, and to solely blame LRMs is grossly misguided in my opinion. The same thing applies to people getting shot at by DACA, MRMs, or any other high DPS weapon systems where the damage you take increases linearly with the amount of time that you're exposed. This is the same reason why LBX 10 has gotten better over the past year, despite having nearly no changes made to the weapon. Imagine if mechs could move just as quickly as they had pre-skill tree. Not only LRMs, but also these DPS weapon systems would also decrease in effectiveness. The skill tree furthermore made radar deprivation not mandatory, where it was kind of before. When we were on a module system, every mech had one or two mech modules, which couldn't be used for weapon upgrades. Typically, the two mech modules people got were radar deprivation and advanced seismic, which were better than any of the other choices for most builds. Now, a lot of people ignore the sensor tree completely and put everything in firepower or armor. This became an indirect buff to LRMs. Similarly, if you carried ECM, you would have to invest 14 skill nodes to get back ECM's original functionality. For some people, it means not taking ECM altogether, or some people simply don't know those two ECM nodes are something that they have to get. Overall, I think if people were playing LRMs prior to April, they would have seen that the performance of LRMs have gotten better, but ultimately it hasn't really changed that much. They've gotten to the point where LRM boats are no longer a joke in the solo queue, but because their actual performance still has such a high dependency on the maps and teams that you get, I still don't think they can be considered good weapons. In the final part of my video, I'll talk about a few ways to protect yourself from LRMs. If you follow these guidelines, it doesn't mean you'll never die from LRMs, but they'll reduce your chances of dying to them without making any real sacrifices. Number 1, get aggressive and get your team to be aggressive. LRMs feed on passiveness. If you simply run away each time you get an incoming missile warning, then you're letting the LRM guy have his way. Instead, maybe find another angle to shoot the LRM boat and make him have to pay attention to you and change his target lock, which makes him spend more time not shooting your team. LRM boats can now almost fire forever and not hit their heat cap. So the longer you wait to attack, the more time they have to do damage to you and your team. LRMs are also defenseless against pushes due to their reduced or zero damage inside of 180. So while they're running away from a push, they can't do damage and you're essentially taking him out of the game. Unlike direct fire mechs who can help hold back a push, the LRM boat has no choice but to run until he's back at a safe firing position. You have to know that when an LRM mech is firing at you with direct line of sight, he's actually really vulnerable because he has to stare at you during all this time, exposing his CT. So he really prefers not to shoot something that's also looking directly at him back. This match that I'm showing right now is a good example of where the enemy team gets aggressive. And I don't think either team does anything really wrong here. My damage output gets limited even on relatively LRM friendly map because of how often I have to run away. Number 2, pick LRM unfriendly maps like Solaris City, River City, and Mining. Crimson Straits can easily be LRM unfriendly if you can force a fight under the platform and avoid the relatively open D5 area. Actually, only a few maps in NWO are truly LRM friendly and offer minimal cover. It's just that a lot of people don't use cover properly, which leads me to number 3. Carry high burst damage mid-range weapons while hugging cover. High burst damage builds give LRMs and their spotters little time to get locks. Right now, there are just too many people way overexposed when they take shots and walk across open terrain for no reason. So if you're getting LRM'd a lot on maps not called Polar and Alpine, look at your positioning. The further you are from an LRM boat, the longer it takes for them to get locks on you, and also longer it takes for these slow missiles to reach you. So mid-range helps you avoid damage that way. Number 4, carry ECM and make sure to get both ECM nodes. Even with tag, it takes about 3 seconds for LRM mechs to lock onto you, so they're a pretty decent LRM counter. There are some very good ECM mechs out there nowadays, like the Hellbringer, Blood Asp, and Sunspider, and some above average ones like the Marauder 2CD and Fafnir. I'm not saying play ECM mechs exclusively, but if you're having trouble with LRMs, you have plenty of ECM mechs to choose from. As a bonus, ECM lights are really good at sneaking up behind LRM boats, who are usually sitting in the back presenting themselves as easy targets. Number 5, take at least 60% radar depth. Like I said earlier, a lot of people ignore the sensor tree, and I think it's a mistake unless you're very good with positioning. 60% radar depth can cut down LRM locks by a second or more, which could save you from taking lots of damage. Radar depth has to be combined with hugging cover to be effective, but I see a lot of people who are close to cover without radar depth, and I can still get an LRM salvo on him after he's gotten back into cover due to my target decay skill nodes. Beyond LRMs, radar depth has the additional effect of making enemies lose interest in you more quickly. Suppose you get spotted by an enemy and your red diamond gets shown on everybody's minimap. The longer that you stay on that enemy minimap, the more people will look for you and pay attention to where you are. If you show up and disappear quickly, some people won't even notice because they weren't paying attention to their minimap at that moment. So there are benefits to the skill even when you're not facing LRM boats. Number 6, pay attention to UAVs and shoot them down ASAP. Sometimes UAVs stay up for a minute with nobody doing anything about it. If you've got ECM mechs taking LRM fire, or you're behind cover but getting incoming missile warnings, you ought to look up and see whether there's a UAV somewhere. If you can't shoot it, call it out on comms and someone else could help you take it out. Finally, I want to mention that AMS is not that good of an LRM counter. A clan LRM 80 boat or IS LRM 60 can punch through even triple AMS. And in order to take triple or quad AMS, you don't have that many good mech choices, so it's a little bit weak. I think if a mech decides to invest in AMS, it should give me a truly effective defense, which is why I still don't take AMS right now. Okay guys, that's all I have to say on this subject. I know some of you will disagree with me, and that's okay. I like to hear other people's opinions, so do let me know what you think. If you like these kinds of videos, please make sure to subscribe and click the bell button to be notified of new videos. And I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.